If you just got the Nikon Zf and you're anxious to go out and start creating some photographs, slow down a little bit. There are some settings that you should set first before creating photos, and we're going to go through those in this video. We're going to go through some of the most important settings to set first, my recommendations for what you should set for those settings. Again, they're my recommendations. Your needs may be different, but I do just want to make sure that you consider setting these settings that we mentioned here in this video. We're not going to go through all of the settings here. You can find a walkthrough of all of the settings in my Nikon Zf tutorial course at photocourses.link/ZF. Use the code TUBE20 for 20% off of that course. Because there are so many menu settings in the Nikon Zf, in the interest of keeping this video to a manageable, decent length, what I'm going to do here is only cover the default settings that I think you should change first. And I'm going to tell you why, just so that you can determine whether or not you actually want to change those settings. So anything not mentioned here is either fine leaving at the default or is situation dependent, kind of like the AF area setting. That's going to change based on what you're photographing. But what we're going to go through here are some settings that you can kind of set once and then forget. The default settings that I recommend you should change before you start using this camera. We're going to start in the photo shooting menu and go to image quality. Now this sets the file type that is recorded to the card, and the default is JPEG normal. So that's going to give you a medium quality JPEG file for the final image. If you want that RAW file also, ensure that RAW is set. I personally record RAW plus the ultra fine JPEG so that if my JPEG looks great out of the camera, I can just use that. Otherwise, I have that RAW file as an archival backup. Now, even if you only want to record the JPEG file, I'd still recommend choosing fine with that star for the quality to give you the best quality possible. Digital storage is pretty cheap these days, so there's no reason to not record the highest quality possible. If you are recording that RAW file, let's go into the RAW recording submenu. The default here is high efficiency with that star. Now that is a lossy compression algorithm to downsize the RAW file, meaning that some data is discarded during that compression process to make the file smaller. If you're recording the RAW file because you want all the raw data, set lossless compression here. Are you going to notice the difference between all of those types when you're viewing a photo fit to your screen? Probably not. But if you want to get the most out of that RAW file, choose lossless. We're now going to jump down into the custom setting menu, which is where a lot of the Nikon Zf defaults that I change are. And in this menu, if you've never used a Nikon camera before, I do want to point out that when you change something from the defaults, you're going to see an asterisk next to that submenu designation. For example, if you see star A5, that means that A5 is set to something other than the default. A1, all by itself, without that star, means that that is set to the default. So we're going to go into the A group, focus, A5, store points by orientation. Off, the default, means that your focus point is going to remain in the same absolute position on the screen when it's rotated between the horizontal and vertical orientations. So if you have single point set for your AF area mode and it's at the bottom of the screen in the horizontal landscape orientation, and then you rotate that camera 90 degrees to, say, do a portrait, you're going to have that single point off to the far side of the screen now. But if you want that focus point to actually be like a wide AF area towards the top third of the screen in the portrait orientation, set this to focus point and AF area mode. That's going to let you have different AF area modes and different positions for different camera orientations. They're going to go back to whatever you had set the last time the camera was in that orientation. And I find that really handy and a big time saver. Let's now go to A10, focus point display. The AFC in focus display submenu, this is set to off as a default. So the focus point is never going to change color when a lock is confirmed. It's either going to stay yellow or red depending on the AF area mode that you're using. And if you have release set for A1, AFC priority selection, you're not really going to have a good visual indication of when the camera has a focus lock in continuous autofocus mode. So I turn this on. And when that's on, that focus point is going to turn green when the camera confirms a lock in AFC. We're going to go into the D group, shooting display, and into D6, extended shutter speeds. If this is off, you're going to be limited to setting a 30-second exposure for the maximum time. If you think that you might, for any reason, want to make an exposure longer than 30 seconds, turn this on so that you have the option of increasing that shutter speed to 15 minutes. D13, release timing indicator, is for when you have the burst mode, the release mode, set to C30, the continuous 30 frames per second. The default is type B. Type B means that little white lines are going to appear around the edges of the display when you're doing a burst in that C30 mode. Yeah, I can't for the life of me see those lines during that mode. I can't record them here, so I'm just going to have to simulate what they look like, but I can't really make them out. They're not that obvious. They're very difficult to see. So I set type A so that screen flickers instead, which I find is a lot more obvious. We're now going to go to the playback menu, series playback, list series as single thumbnails. You're probably going to want to turn this on if you do a lot of burst photography. When this is on, you're going to see each burst as one and only one thumbnail in the playback grid view. You can view each individual photo in that burst if you want to, but that grid view isn't going to be cluttered with every single photo in that burst. Going into after delete. With the default setting, the camera is always going to advance to the next sequential photo after you delete a photo, even if you are scrolling in the other direction, backwards. And that just always throws me off. If I'm scrolling from the end of the camera roll to the beginning and I delete a photo, I want to continue in the direction that I was going. So if you set this to continue as before, the next photo that you see after you delete a photo is going to be in the same direction that you were scrolling when you deleted that photo. Let's move now into the setup menu, save focus position. I like to turn this on so that after cycling camera power, the lens is going to be at its last focus position. If you leave this as the default, off, the focus distance is going to be reset to infinity each time the power is cycled. Copyright info isn't really a default setting that you need to change, but be sure to add your name to both the artist and the copyright fields and attach those to the photos. Energy saving photo mode, turning this on is going to help you stretch that battery life just a little further. The screen refresh rate is going to slow down 15 seconds prior to the standby timer that you have set in custom setting C3. You can always press any button to wake it up. The slot empty release lock, I like to change to release locked because I'm kind of an idiot sometimes and I don't always notice that I don't have a memory card installed. So when you set this to release locked, it's going to inhibit shutter release until a card is inserted, just in case you didn't notice that you don't have a memory card in the camera. We're now going to go into the network menu, into the Connect to Smart Device submenu. Select for upload. Auto select for upload is turned on as a default, which means that all of the photos, as you create them, are going to be tagged for transfer to the SnapBridge app when you connect to it. I find that rather annoying. I'd much rather manually choose which photos that I want to transfer to my smartphone, so I set this off. So those are some things that I recommend you get set right away before you start creating pictures with this camera. Once you get those set, then you can start playing around with all of the other settings And like I said, you can see what all of the menu options do in that Nikon ZF tutorial course at photocourses.link/ZF. Use the code TUBE20 for 20% off. We go through all of the other exposure modes, focus tools, and ways you can customize your camera for more efficient photography in that course as well. Let us know if you have any questions or comments about what we discussed here. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.